The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host. And today I have an honored guest. In fact, I'm kind of in awe of my guest and just trying to be two guys talking. I think you'll enjoy our conversation. Let me see, your name shouldn't be difficult to pronounce, isn't it? Just Carl McColman?
You got it. Yes.
Okay. It looks like it's simple enough. We're just talking about it. It's a name I'd never seen before, and it means you're the son of the dove. Is that right?
McColman would mean that. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I love words and etymologies, and frequently, and when I'm like, if I'm in the grocery store and the clerk has a name that I haven't seen, I always ask them what it means, and sometimes they know. Anyway, so you are. Would you say that you've somehow become an expert in Christian mysticism? Would that be correct to say?
I probably wouldn't use that word myself, but others have accused me of that. So yeah, you wouldn't be the first.
Some years ago when I started writing and eventually podcasting, I was working with a company to teach me how to go out to all the world and tell the good news, which means marketing and tech and all of that. And they made us all stand up and say, you say your name and that you're an expert in fill in the blank.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of get over any shyness or a sense of humility that didn't serve the mission. It doesn't do any good to be expert in something and then not open your mouth. So you are, whether or not you claim it or not, you've at least written the big book of Christian mysticism, and you updated it into the even bigger, new and improved. Actually, is it the new big book of Christian mysticism?
The new big book of Christian mysticism. Say it 3 times fast. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, would you give my audience a sense of what it would be like to hang out with you, to know you? You live in Georgia, don't you?
Yeah, I'm just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's just a delight to be here. Yeah, I live outside of Atlanta, Georgia. I am somebody with a lifelong interest in mystical and contemplative spirituality. And I have a funny story about that whole humility thing, so maybe we'll get to that. I am a lay associate of the Trappist monastery here in Georgia, so I've studied with Trappist monks for a number of years now. These days, I'm an affiliate spiritual director with the Jesuit Retreat House here in Atlanta. So I have a ministry of spiritual direction. As you know, I've written a number of books. I lead retreats. I have a Patreon page, so I do some videos and online work as well. And I'm really just incredibly blessed to have been able to give my life to that topic that is of abiding interest to me, whether or not I'm an expert at it, but mystical and contemplative spirituality, primarily grounded in the Christian tradition, but of course with interest in mysticism, however it shows up all over the world.
Of course, you can't be involved in mystical anything without it blurring over into across whatever kind of boundaries you want to try to keep it within, kind of like your shirt. Yeah, your wife does those, right?
Yes, and for anybody who's only listening, so I wear what's called an ice-dyed shirt. Little different from tie-dye, although similar. And it's done by my wife, who is an ice dyer. Yes, I'm very
I never heard
fortunate.
of ice dyeing. Well, that's a new thing already. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
it's quite colorful and lovely.
Thank you.
It looks like one of those backdrops that sometimes podcasters have that look all cosmic, like Starry Sky or something like that. It's really pretty. Well, so you have a wife. We've learned that already. Tell us a little bit about your domestic life, or what it's like to be you apart from being a guest on my show.
Sure. So yeah, so Fran and I live together in again Clarkston, Georgia, suburb of Atlanta. We only have one child. She is in heaven. She died at the age of 29 after a lifelong journey with polycystic kidney disease.
Uh,
So we miss her, but we also are at peace with the fact that she's off to her next assignment, and that the love is still very strong,
uh,
and we will someday hug her again.
yeah.
So that's
How
kind
long
of our.
has since her passing?
She Was born in 85, so she died in 2014. So it's been just over 11 years now.
About 11 years. A lot of my audience are, well, I hardly know anybody that hasn't lost loved ones close to them,
Yeah.
but a lot of people that are part of my audience are people that are, interested in after death consciousness and uh, such things.
And I don't know if you like talking about dreams, but both Fran and I, well, actually, I take that back. A friend of Rhiannon's who spoke with Fran, and Fran has kind of taken it as her own. But then I also was blessed with two very meaningful dreams, uh, giving us engagement with Rhiannon in her, post-mortem life.
Hmm.
So be happy to share those with you as well.
Well,
But to finish the story about us, we have three cats. Our house, I like to say, is full of icons, books, and love. So that's kind of the way we do our lives. It's so interesting. Before Rhiannon died, she asked both of us separately. She said to me, "Will you take care of mommy?" And I said, "Of course I will." And she asked the same of Fran. And we only found that out when we were comparing notes after her passing. So we kind of take that seriously. And this idea of living your best life or living a fun life or a joyful life, we are kind of under advisement to do that. So
good for
we
you.
have a real commitment to that. So
Good for you. And before I was reading the first edition of the Big Book of Christian Mysticism. At the time, you're working in the bookstore at the monastery.
yes, the last kind of legitimate quote unquote job that I had, I worked for the Trappist monks in Conyers, Georgia. Shout out to them, Monastery of the Holy Spirit. And I worked in their bookshop. So I did that for about 8 years. A wonderful experience. It was wonderful working with the monks. And it was the monks who really supported me, not only in my writing, which they certainly supported me that way, but also in moving into a ministry as a retreat leader. I started leading retreats for them, and then it just kind of grew. And that's the reason why I ended up leaving them, was just that ministry had gotten so big
I see.
that I just needed to give myself to it. So, yeah.
Uh-huh. How old are you?
This is what, October? In December of this year, I will turn 65.
Okay. I'm conscious of age. I always have been, but I'm about to turn 70. And so
Okay.
I'm thinking of myself as a nearly 70-year-old anymore.
Mhm.
Well, you moved into this world of Christian mysticism, and a subset of that being Catholic Christian
Mhm.
mysticism. Did you move through that through an academic route? You're not a priest and you're not a deacon, and so
I'm,
like when I was first going and when I was looking at my vocation in the late 70s, there was generally beginning to be a lot of opportunity for lay Catholic people. Uh,
mhm.
we were sort of breaking barriers at the time.
Right. Well, and I'm not a cradle Catholic. I actually grew up in the Lutheran Church.
I see.
And I had, when I was 16 years old, and I have had friends since tell me that this is not unusual for adolescents, but I'll just tell my story. When I was 16 years old, I was at a church camp, was not looking for it, not expecting it, not wanting it. But during the communion service on Saturday night, this weekend youth camp experience, I basically had a full throttle mystical experience.
About that.
I had the sense of time standing still, the sense of the room being filled with light, I mean, dazzling light. My heart was just overflowing with love. It felt like there was love flowing between me and all the other people, almost like this energetic current. It was just the most amazing, amazing experience that I have ever had in my life. And and like I said, I wasn't looking for it. I Scout's honor. I had not taken any mushrooms or anything like that. I had not smoked any weed. I was stone cold sober. And again, like I said, I wasn't looking for it. It just, my heart just cracked open. And I think, if you want to get psychological about it, I have had a lifelong relationship with anxiety. So you can say it had to do with anxiety, with feeling at home. There are all sorts of things. We can argue about that till the cows come home. But the reality is this was this was grace. It was just gratuitous, and it launched me on a very intentional spiritual journey. This was the late 1970s, also for me. So the big thing back then was charismatic Christianity.
Yeah.
So I fell in with the charismatics, but there were some theological constraints for me. I was not comfortable with the kind of the theology of a lot of anxiety about the devil. And again, anxiety is a trigger for me. So I didn't stay there very long. I kind of pulled back from that. Then right after I graduated from high school, I had a dream, very moving dream about the world coming to an end. And again, you can be psychological and you say, well, my world was coming to an end. I just graduated from high school. I was getting ready to go away for college for the first time.
Hmm.
But I just took the dream at face value. It was very spiritual, filled with spiritual imagery, really kind of unsettling. And so I turned to a friend of mine, a guy who was about 10 or 12 years older than me. He had been the organist of my church. By that point, he had moved on to something else, but we'd stayed in touch. And so I went over to David's house and I said, David, I had this really weird dream and I just don't quite know what to make of it. And so I described the dream to him and he listened and then he said, I have a book for you. And he gave me a copy of the book Mysticism by Evelyn Underhill, who was a British authority on mysticism who lived about 100 years ago. And I read that book and, again, I found my life calling, basically. It
Good
was,
for you. You found it so early.
yeah,
For
yeah,
God found
yeah.
you so early.
And not to say that I haven't had many twists and turns along the way, but that has been kind of my through line. So, and I have been very interfaith. I got involved in earth-centered spirituality, goddess spirituality. More recently, I've become very connected to Buddhism. But Christianity is my home faith. I'm silly in love with Jesus, so I do have a kind of a spiritual center of gravity within Christianity, but with that kind of sense of hospitality and flow with other wisdom traditions as well. So,
When you were describing that experience, you said you were 16, was it?
yes. Hmm.
Yeah. My people that have read my story in my first book on the Wizard of Oz and Toto too, I tell a story big on a retreat in my senior year of high school. I went to a Catholic high school, but it was a place where when we would have a mass, it was important to be aloof, uh, to make sure that you didn't look like you were into it. And so it was, you know how Episcopalians sometimes call themselves the frozen chosen. We
Hmm.
were like that,
Sure.
and but there was this retreat going on at the nearby university that was led by college students for high school seniors, and
Hmm.
it was called The Happening because it was so groovy. It was
Hmm.
1974, and
Hmm.
people were going to it and coming back all on fire in their love of God and Jesus and everything. And I went on it very, very reluctantly. I was the president of the high school, and so I had a kind of a visible role in the place, and
Hmm.
I couldn't hide indefinitely. Eventually, I broke down and went to this thing, but I didn't realize that I'd been breathing on one lung. My father and I had a quiet, introverted falling out when when I was in eighth grade, and I just shut down inside. I just said I've been hurt, and that's not going to happen again. And so I just decided that I was going to be polite, and I would raise myself. I had four siblings, and my parents were busy raising other children anyway. I just thought I'll be
Hmm.
the one that's so obedient that I'll just be perfect, and then
Hmm.
I won't need any parental oversight, or at least only the minimum. And when I was about to go away to school on my parents' dime, these people started asking me about my heart, and I said, "Well, the truth is, I've never spoken of it." And I waited until everybody else had spoken because that's what introverts do. And when there was nobody else, it was my turn. I just came clean and said I haven't spoken to him about anything of importance in 5 years, and I don't want to leave that way. It just seems dishonest. And I was
Right.
pretty sure I'd never come back except to visit. They were giving me wings, and I intended to use them, and that's exactly the way it played out. But when I went, I told the truth. I told all the detail of it, and then they brought in a priest and said, would anyone like to go to confession? And I thought, well, I've already done the hard part. And I confessed to a circle of like 7 people. So I went ahead and made it official in the Roman Catholic way. We do that. And then when I went to, there was a mass, a Eucharist that concluded the thing. And when I took communion, I had what you had.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting it either. All I did was do what I'd done since first grade. I put the communion wafer in my mouth, and then I went all cosmic.
Yep.
No
Yep.
boundaries, full of love. And once that happens, you just can't go back to any other way of being. You just,
Yeah.
this is,
It's an initiation, isn't it?
it
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah.
I'll never be the same. It's not as though you walk from, ecstatic experience to ecstatic experience, but I still, I'm almost 70, and that's still the most important thing that's ever happened to me,
Yeah. Yeah.
including being ordained, because that long preceded that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that explains, well, maybe it does, at least in part, why this became a life's work.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little
Certainly.
bit more about that.
Well, and I tested a vocation actually on a couple of different occasions because that was kind of the script. If you're really into God, you become a minister.
Yeah.
And so even as as a Lutheran, and then later I became an Episcopalian. When I became Catholic, and I suppose I could have become a deacon, but obviously priesthood was out of the question since I'm very happily married. But but the every time I tested the vocation, there was always some sort of a roadblock, either internal or external. But what I've come to now is that I'm called to ministry. I'm not called to ordain ministry,
Yes.
and and then that's okay. I'm very blessed to have very few regrets in my life, and not getting ordained is not a regret. But but I did kind of, I kind of waited tables, metaphorically speaking, for most of my career. After college, I worked for a company that managed college bookstores. I did that for about 15 years.
Slow down a
Then
minute. You skipped over, what did you study in college?
I studied English.
Oh,
I've known since even before, in junior high, I knew I wanted to write.
okay.
I mean, I thought I was going to write fiction until I tried my hand at it. So, so I kind of pulled back from fiction and wrote. For my graduate education, I went to George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. Shout out to GMU, and got my degree, master's degree in English. I never got a PhD, but my master's degree in English with a concentration in professional writing and editing. So, I've done a little bit of editing along the way, and now I'm just, amazed that I have over 20 nonfiction books to my credit. But oh, I should mention one other thing. When I was 31, I think I was 31. It would have been 92. So, I was in a fairly serious car accident, not life-threatening. I like to say I didn't have a near-death experience, but I had a brush with death experience
Uh-huh.
because if anything had been slightly different, it could have been very, very serious. I got a little sleepy. I was driving home from a business trip, and at that time I was living in Sewanee, Tennessee. I was working at the college bookstore in Sewanee, Tennessee, which is about 90 miles southeast of Nashville, and I flew in and out of Nashville to go to this conference. So I got to Nashville late, like 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and I still had a 90-mile drive. And I was young and foolish, didn't do the sensible thing, which would be to get a hotel for $60 and spend the night. I just drove off into the night, and I got a little sleepy. And we were actually right at the foothills of the Cumberland Plateau. And there was a semi in front of me, and he slowed down, and I didn't. And
Uh-huh.
I plowed into him. And what's funny is that what I remember about it was just kind of being in this kind of, semi-conscious state, kind of drifty state. And I think as I was driving into the semi, my lights hit the back of the back of the truck, and so I got bathed in light, and that kind of woke me up. Probably saved my life, because I saw that, and and if I had been thinking, all I needed to do was take my foot off the gas. But no, I'm sure I panicked, I accelerated, but I also swerved. And so I hit the back of the truck, kind of going at an angle.
Uh-huh.
My car was totaled. The windshield came in on me. In fact, to this day, I have scar tissue on my arm here and also a little bit on my forehead. I mean, this was 30 years ago, so it's mostly healed. But broke my jaw in 3 places. It was, really quite frightening. And it turned into an ecstatic experience. I think just recognizing that I hadn't died in this kind of serious accident, that I wasn't hurt, beyond
You
those
weren't hurt.
superficial. I
Your
mean,
jaw was broken in 3 places,
yeah.
but you weren't
But
hurt.
I didn't break my neck. That kind of. That's what
All
I
right,
mean.
I got
So
it.
yeah, relatively speaking, I wasn't hurt. 3 days in the hospital, and then all I had was the healing. But the what I remember is getting out of my car afterwards. I was still conscious. I could stand up. My glasses were gone. They'd been destroyed. But and somebody else, pulled over because they saw what had happened. And I tried to talk to them, and I couldn't talk because,
Uh-huh.
my mouth was full of pieces of my jaw. They get the ambulance. I'm lying in the ambulance, and I don't know if you remember that old Grateful Dead song where they sing, "I will survive, I
I
will
do. I do.
survive."
Yeah.
That song was going through my head, and it's like I just popped again into this kind of ecstatic place. Not literally ecstatic, because I was very embodied, but blissful might be a better word. I was just
Mhm.
filled with bliss and filled with joy.
I wonder if your
And
guardian angel was singing to you.
maybe, maybe my guardian angel's a deadhead. Who knows? But but the so I got through the accident. It was just a lot of grace. Had the surgery. They put my jaw back together. My mouth was wired shut for 6 weeks, which was tricky, but I was fine. I was okay. And Fran and I were dating at the time, and Fran loves to say, "If you had died in that accident, I would have killed you." But but I survived. Our relationship just got that much sweeter. But I remember going to my spiritual director afterwards, and she and I were processing it. And I said, I don't know what to make of this experience, but it feels like an initiation. And she encouraged me. She said, "Do you think you can maybe come up with an affirmation or two to kind of embody what you think, what the message is of this?" So I put that in my prayer over the next month. And I came back to see her, and I said 4 words. And she said, "What are they?" And I said, "I write, I pray. I write and I pray." I said, if God spared my life with that accident, I believe he calls me to prayer. But I already believed that. Prayer was already important to me. And he's given me the gift of writing, which at that time I wasn't really using because I was working in a college bookstore.
Yeah.
I was doing a little bit of writing, mostly for me, not getting published. So that really was, it's kind of like Teresa of Avila, her second calling. That was kind of like my second calling as a writer. And so you figure that was the summer of 92. My first book came out in the summer of 97. So, and my first book was a book about spirituality, and I've been writing about various aspects of the spiritual life ever since.
Were you also doing editing of other people's writing? You said that.
I've done a little bit along the way. It's never been a huge thing for me, but it's been a way to pay the bills here or
Well,
there.
that's where I was going. How do you pay the bills? Because most writers starting out don't hit it big with their first.
Well, yeah, and I still haven't hit it big, but I've been very blessed to have several books that have done reasonably well. But and remember, so my first book came out in 97. I didn't quit my day job till 2013.
All right.
So right away, there was 16 years there. But but if you looked at if you look at my finances right now, most of my spiritual directees do pay me, so I generate income that way. I generate income through retreats. And then, and then I have online revenue. I have 2 newsletters on Substack, and then I use Patreon. So, people support me. People are so generous
Yeah, I
and
know what
how
you mean.
they support my work. So, and the books generate a little bit of income, but as you well know, you don't get rich writing books,
No.
and so, but when you add it all together, and Fran and I we live almost monastically ourselves in terms of the simplicity,
Mhm.
We are in the same house we bought in 1997, so our mortgage is ridiculously low, and we live simply, and we're happy. And most of my travel tends to be related to work. If I get invited somewhere, but like in the next 6 months, I'm going to be speaking in Hawaii and I'm going to be speaking in London. It's so, and Fran's coming with me, so we get to go to Hawaii, we get to go to London. Not a bad life for somebody who, again, whose income is relatively modest by modern day standards.
Uh-huh. And you're
So
happy.
lots of gratitude. So
Yeah. Well, could you give us 5 minutes on the basics of what people would learn if they open the new big book of Christian mysticism? The basic questions. What's a mystic? What's not a mystic? What are misconceptions? Just give us a kernel of basics of fundamentals of
well,
what you think.
if I can take a minute or two to tell the backstory of the book, and then I think that'll factor into
Okay.
your. So I mentioned, I had that meaningful dream. A friend gave me a book on mysticism. That book just opened up my spiritual life. Fast forward, 20 or 30 years later, and I'm listening to public radio one night, and they had a talk by the author Anne Lamott. And, and Anne Lamott, in addition to being an amazing writer, is also, or at least she probably isn't now, but for many years she was a writing teacher. And so she was talking about her experience as a writing teacher. And one of the things she said during this talk was, I always tell my students, you should write the book you wish you could have read. And I still remember this as clear as a bell. And I'm driving, I think I was driving home from the monastery. I'm driving home from the monastery. I hear that. And it's like I said out loud, well, the book I wish I could have read would have been Evelyn Underhill's book, only written today. So that was the germ of the book right there. That was its conception, if you will.
All right.
And so the book is a meditation on why mysticism should not just be locked up in monasteries. And I think, it's really interesting because when I started writing the book, and I really worked on it pretty seriously for 3 years, between the time, I guess the Anne Lamott to publication would have been more than 3 years because contract to publication was 3 years. So probably 4 to 5 years. But at any rate, I'd be at parties, I'd be out for dinner with friends, and people are like, what are you doing, Carl? Well, I'm working on a book. What's the book about? Christian mysticism. What I tended to find was that people who were either Protestant or simply not particularly religious, or maybe members of another faith, would usually say, well, that's interesting. What's mysticism? They have no idea what the word meant.
Yes.
Catholics, on the other hand, would typically say, oh, that's interesting, but I could never be a mystic.
Yeah.
So Catholics were more likely to be familiar with the term. I think because of the saints, Teresa
Yeah.
of Avila, John of the Cross, Merton, people like that. People in the Catholic world, mysticism is more kind of, recognized. But there was this kind of cultural humility. Only the saints are mystics, or only great writers like Merton. Ordinary people like me could never be a mystic. So I realized I had 2 challenges with this book, and one was to introduce people to the concept of mysticism, but the related challenge, the corollary challenge, was to encourage people that mysticism is for everybody. It's not just for the super holy. And so you probably know that wonderful line from Karl Rahner. He wrote an essay called The Church of the Future. It was published in the 1960s. And in that essay, he says this almost as a throwaway line. He says, the Christian of the future will be a mystic or will not exist at all. The Christian of the future will be a mystic or will not exist at all. So Karl Rahner writes that in 1965. One of my contentions is we are living in Rahner's future because it's 60 years later. And I don't know what it's like where you are, but here in the American South, the Bible Belt, churches are closing all the time. Primarily the Protestant churches, but you see this. And I get invited to speak at churches, and there's, this building that seats 300, and there's 30 people sitting there.
Yeah.
And most of them have hair the same color I do. So Christianity as an institution seems to be going through, in fact, what's her name? Elaine Heath, a theologian who I think teaches at Duke Divinity School. She argues that the church in America is going through a dark night of the soul. And I think there's some truth there that, young people are increasingly, suspicious of the institution. And even many people who are still, they never miss Sunday Mass, but there's almost a kind of going through the motions quality. And so, this is what Rahner is pointing to. He's saying in the future, Christianity will either lose meaning for people and they'll just disappear, or they will be invited into a place of supreme meaning.
Yes.
And so I think we're beginning to see that right now. And so, for example, I mentioned I'm an associate of the Trappist monastery. I know this particular monastery, and I think it's true at almost all monasteries in Europe and North America. In the 70s, I think they had 100 monks. Now they have about 20. And again, they're mostly older guys. But they have about 100 lay associates.
Yes.
So it's like the call to the interior life is just as robust as it ever was. But it's no longer limited to the people who give themselves to that kind of lifestyle. I think it's a beautiful lifestyle, and I support people who have that vocation. I think God will always give us some people of every generation who are called into the cloister. But I think we're living in an age where mysticism, contemplation, contemplative spirituality has been set free from the cloister. Mm. And so this is really who this book is for. So, now to really answer your question, yes, obviously the book is a meditation on what is mysticism? What does the word mean? How does that apply to faith? How does it apply to religious life if you're religious? I do not assume that my readers are Catholic or even necessarily Christian. So I try to write about it in a way that hopefully people who are very engaged with church would find helpful, but also people for whom church is just not part of their spiritual vocabulary could also find it helpful as well. So that's the first half of the book. And then the second half of the book is more of a, how do you live this? How do you bring it into your own body and let it illuminate your own spirituality?
All right. I'm going to go there in a minute, but before I do, one phrase that Catholics might be familiar with is private revelation. Mm-hmm. That's a category, and when you were talking earlier about Catholics would at least know that the mystical tradition, they'd be able to name some mystic saints and mm-hmm. or think of monasteries and so on. But there's also this category just called private revelation, where people have mystical experiences like the ones that you and I described having as teens, mm-hmm. and knowing that it was real and true and important and profound, and sometimes having the courage to tell that story to others. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those stories, it's not just about self-revelation. It feels like a vocation that you're supposed to talk about this the way that the commandment on the last page of the Gospel of Matthew, go out to all the world and tell the good news, that I have this wonderful thing happen to me. I'd like to tell you about it, not so that you will admire me or think of me as some big deal, but because I can't contain it. It needs to be spoken. And a lot of people in the churches have experiences that are ecstatic, which just means to not be stationary. Right. Stasis. Right. Ecstatic just means to not be standing still.
Beyond the stasis, yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah,
having something that moves you and motivates you and has you in motion. Mm-hmm. And so for this audience, I hope that if you have experiences that somehow belong in this realm and they've not been spoken, find somebody to talk to speak to, and know that there's a category, even if your experience doesn't line up with Bible verses or catechisms or what you were taught. There's a category for private revelation. And in the Catholic Church, that means God might have revealed something new, but nobody's obligated to believe it.
Yeah, as the way I would put it is that was a gift for you.
Yes. Yeah.
And, Julian of Norwich, one of the great mystics, and she was a visionary. She had 16 different visions. And she talks about this in her book. And one of the dangers of having a visionary experience is it can lead to ego inflation.
Yes.
Or to use classical theological language, presumption. But I think this is why so many of the great mystics throughout history have put so much emphasis on humility, not because they're trying to keep us down, but because they're trying to shield us from the trap of ego inflation.
Yes.
But Julian was wonderful. That was not her problem, not in the least. She was tremendously down to earth and had a tremendous kind of natural humility about her. But she recognizes that writing a book about her visions at a time when women did not write books.
Yes.
Julian was actually the first woman of any discipline to write a book in the English language that we know of, that has survived.
Uh-huh.
And so it's really fascinating that the first woman's voice in the literature comes from a mystic, comes from somebody who felt compelled to share her experience. Mm-hmm. But she recognizes that she could easily be accused of presumption. And so she says pretty early on in the book, she says, listen, I had these visions. They don't make me any better than anybody else. I don't know why God gave them to me. He just did. And I'm just going to tell you my story. And listen, the purpose behind these visions was to help us to draw closer to God. If you read this book and you draw closer to God than I am, then the visions are more yours than they are mine.
All right, good.
And I think that's such beautiful theology. So you're right. I'm all for sharing your story, sharing your private revelations, sharing your own experience, and recognizing that other people may not understand it or they may want to push back at it. I mean, that's part of the challenge of doing that. But always with this idea of, we are given amazing experiences, of God, of spirit, of our ancestors, or people who have passed beyond. I mean, angels, all of the whole catalog of extraordinary experiences. We're not given these to puff up our egos.
Right.
We are given these so that we may live a better, happier, more meaningful life, and hopefully be of service to others.
Yeah. So maybe share that happiness with others in a way that uplifts them.
And so that's, so I totally agree with you, obviously. And I mean, I remember talking to one of the monks, one of the Trappists, and I said, I kind of got a little scrupulous. And I said, is it presumptuous for me to write this book? Because after all, I'm not a monk, I'm not a priest, I'm not a deacon, don't have a PhD, blah, 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 blah. And the monk was wonderful. He was an elderly Sicilian fellow named Father Anthony, God rest his soul. And he looked at me and he said, are you a good writer? It wasn't the question I was expecting. But I said, well, I hope I am. I think I am. He said, then write the book. He was like, don't waste your time worrying about whether you're called to do this or not. If you feel like you've got a gift, share it.
Well, and how many words have been spoken to you in your 65 years, but those somehow jumped out at you, grabbed your heart, you knew they were true, and you acted on them.
Yeah. It gave me, and then if somebody thinks, oh gee, he's just on his own little ego trip, well, that's kind of on them. I work with my spiritual director in my daily practice. I try to keep my heart pure.
People said such things about Jesus too.
Well, there is that, so.
I don't know if you've been around Dominicans much, but our little history is that, in 1206 and later 1216, Dominic had been given over to live in a monastery when he was 8 years old.
Oh my, okay.
His uncle, it was not exactly, it was a canon regular. You know what those are? They were monks. They lived a kind of monastic lifestyle around a diocesan cathedral.
Right.
But it was a monastic life, and his uncle was one of those, and his parents gave him into the monastery to be raised, and he decided to stay, and he got ordained, and as a young priest, he had to walk from Spain to Denmark to be the chaplain to a wedding, one of those European royal weddings where somebody's arranged to marry into another clan or whatever it is.
Yep, yep.
And he had never been away from home or outside the monastery. And suddenly he was, yeah, when the sun began to set, you landed in the same Motel 6 with everybody else. And you didn't disappear into cubicles. Everybody slept in one great big room and put your bedroll down somewhere. And so you were talking with everybody along the road. And he just was fascinated with the fact that so many people had begun to leave uh, Catholic faith to believe a lot of odd things, especially about dualism, that the body is evil and
Right.
the spiritual journey is to somehow override the evil of your body. And he just wanted to tell people good news about Jesus and the faith that he lived. Once he got home to his choir style again, he couldn't stand it. He was just too nervous. He had to go out. And so we and the Franciscans were founded at the same time. And, Francis was famous for saying, preach the gospel at all times and use words if necessary. Well, Dominic said, use words all the time.
Yep.
Go out and preach.
Sure, sure, sure.
Go out and talk. Go out and tell your story. And so, when it came time for me to go public about a part of my life that I hadn't shared with the public, afterlife work, um, I had kept it quiet, kind of under a bushel, not because I was afraid, but because I had jobs that I thought it would interfere with.
Right.
My primary ministry was campus ministry, and I was very busy with a lot of big projects around the country in campus ministry. And I just thought, if I start sharing all this mystical stuff, I'll be suspect and it'll get in the way of my day job. So I waited until I was 60 to finally, go full blast public about the more mystical stuff. But for me, it was the fact that I had joined an order that was trying to be semi-contemplative. We're supposed to have the prayer life of a monk, but the
Yep.
active lifestyle of somebody out in the world, not
Sure,
mine.
sure,
So,
sure. And of course, when I think about the Dominicans, of course I think about Aquinas, but I especially think about Eckhart.
yes.
And it's certainly one of anybody who wants to create a short list of the great Christian mystics, Meister Eckhart
Say a
may
little
be on
about
there.
Eckhart, because there are going to be people on this, watching this or listening, that don't know Meister.
So Meister Eckhart was he was a German Dominican, friar, priest, theologian. He actually held the same chair at the University in Paris that Aquinas had held, 100 years before him, or 50 years before him, or whatever. You're giving me a funny look. Am I getting that wrong, or?
No, no, no. I just have a face that scares people.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll try not to. And I have anxiety, so there you go. What a great combination. But he, he was. Let's just put it this way: he was kind of an academic superstar, and wrote a number of treatises in Latin that were very well received. But he also had a preaching ministry. He was a member of the Order of Preachers. Go figure. And a lot of his preaching was often to women religious, and he tended to preach in the vernacular language. So his preaching was typically in German, whereas his learned treatises were more in Latin. And it was his German preaching that got him into trouble. So he's a mystic. He's a non-dual mystic, has a very profound sense of union with God. His great line, if Karl Rahner's is the Christian of the future will be a mystic, Eckhart's great line was, the eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. So, so this profound kind of experiential knowing of radical non-duality between the creature and the creator. And of course, and it was the Franciscans that got nervous about him. It was actually a Franciscan bishop that accuses him of heresy. So he had to walk by that point, I think he was living well, I guess he was still in Paris, but he had to walk all the way to Rome, kind of like Dominic walking all the way to Denmark, defended himself in Rome, and he died shortly thereafter. But the Pope did not formally condemn him of heresy. The Pope did the Pope was uncomfortable with some of his more daring statements. So Eckhart has kind of lived in this kind of twilight space. He's never been canonized. I mean, for my money, he should be a doctor of the church, but there has just been this pall of suspicion over him, similar to what you see with Evagrius or with Origen. Several amazing mystical figures who were just so far ahead of the game that it's like the church didn't know what to do with them, and I think Eckhart falls into that category, but. If I mean, you can get his sermons. They're expensive, but there's a wonderful English translation that's out there. It's called The Complete Mystical Works of Meister Eckhart. And it's, he was a philosopher, so it's very erudite. It's not a beach read by any sense. But his sense of who God was and how God literally emerges from the ground of our own being is just absolutely luminous. And it just, like I say, I read a Buddhist scholar not long ago who said there are 4 great teachers in the world. And one of them was Dogen, who is, of course, the founder of Zen. One of them was Plotinus, the great pagan philosopher and also a great mystic. One of them was Ibn Arabi, great Sufi master, and then the 4th one was Meister Eckhart. And I think that's a reasonable little, very elite club to which Eckhart belongs. So anybody who really wants to dive deep into the philosophy of Christian mysticism, they're going to bump into Eckhart before long.
I would recommend you first because your books might not be a beach read, but they're not too far from that.
Oh, thank you.
Your voice comes through quite plainly, and you don't mind speaking in the first person. You use I statements a lot, where some other authors would have gone into more formal.
And this is where I'm grateful that I did not go the academic route. And I have so much respect for, you think about Harvey Egan or Bernard McGinn, these amazing kind of, scholars of mysticism who have written books that have been so enlightening for me. So please don't hear me as in any way poo-pooing the academy. But there's a certain reserve in academic research and academic writing. And you mentioned, for example, good academic writing. I mean, maybe it's changed since I was in school, but, you didn't write in the first person,
Yeah.
And yet to write out of more of a practitioner base, that's exactly what the publishers and the readers want, is they want, that you inject yourself into the story and be willing to tell your own story. I mean, clearly, in writing a book about mysticism, it's not a memoir, but it is, it's obviously a topic that has been so meaningful to me. And I do want to tell you this one story. So there was an author, he was an English theologian named Kenneth Leach. And I met Kenneth Leach because my spiritual director, Kenneth Leach, was his spiritual director. And so whenever he was in Atlanta, he would always stay with Emmett's house. Emmett was an Episcopal priest, so he'd always stay at Father Emmett's house. And so I got to know Ken, not well, but whenever he was in town, I'd see him. And one time, I took him out for breakfast, and I think it was. It wasn't the Big Book of Christian Mysticism, but I was writing one of my books in which I touch on the contemplative life. And I think I was using the word mystic a lot in our conversation. And so Ken looked at me, and again, he was a generation or two ahead of me. And with this beautiful Mancunian English accent, which I'm not going to try to replicate, but he basically said, "Now, Carl, don't call yourself a mystic." And I was like, well, why not? It's like mysticism is so important to me. And he said, well, it's like calling yourself a shaman or calling yourself a saint. He said, it's oftentimes a sign of ego inflation. He said, listen, but this is what he said, and it has meant so much to me. He said, don't worry about the labels. If you're drawn to mysticism, then go be a mystic. Go do the best you can to follow the path of the mysteries. And then don't worry if you're a mystic or not. And so, and that was very liberating for me because I realized you can get caught up in the labels, both positively and negatively. I mean, there are people who really resist the label. And then whenever I talk to somebody like that, I say, well, then don't use it. Who cares? then it's like, well, what is mysticism? Well, what is mysticism? It's mystery. It's the mystery at the heart of spirituality. It's the fact that we cannot put God into words, which for a Dominican must be kind of frustrating. But, we can talk about God, but what was it, Rashi, the Jewish commentator in the Middle Ages, said, anything that we speak about God leaves glaring omissions.
Of course.
So we move into silence, we move into intuition, we move into trusting the deep places in our heart and in our gut where we speak with myth and metaphor and imagery and deep feeling rather than just proposition or discourse. Not to say there isn't a place for proposition and discourse. After all, I'm a writer. I think language is a gift.
Right.
But to have a humble relationship with language, that the mystery always calls us deeper and calls us deeper and calls us deeper. To be a mystic is to ultimately be somebody who trusts that God loves you infinitely and that you are called to be one with that love. It's an amazing thing to, wow, is that true? Can that be true for me? And yet, what the mystics tell us is it's true for everybody. It
And
is a
many of
gift
them
that
make a
is.
point of even if they write about ecstatic experiences and otherworldly realms and such, they often talk too about doing the dishes or
Oh,
tending
yeah.
the garden and all of that. That I'm going to be grocery shopping when we're done here, and I'm cooking for six tonight, and I'm looking forward to that because I just got back from Richard Rohr's retreat in Albuquerque, the
Uh-huh.
revision conference, and so my head has been just full of input from wonderful teachers for day after day. I'm tired.
Yeah,
I
sure. Oh, yeah. Stuff like
cook.
that is so amazing. But so yeah, and yeah, chop wood and carry water from the
Yeah,
Eastern traditions. I
yeah,
think that is so important, and that's why Benedict, he said, manual labor is an important part of the life of a monk.
sure.
It's not just all sitting there, having your mystical experience.
I
It's
often I do a lot of teaching and retreats and things, and I just ask people, do you believe that God is everywhere? And
mhm,
most of the people that I would be in touch with would say, yes, I believe that's
sure.
true. And I'll say, then how much do you weigh? And sometimes people will blurt it out. They really will. I'll say, well, okay, that 170 pounds is inside of God. And if I wanted to sit in that chair with you, I'd have to push you out of the way or sit in your lap or something. The physics of you right now takes up space inside of God. And but is God also inside you?
Yeah,
Is God in your pancreas? You know,
yeah,
is God up your nose? Is God
yeah.
down your throat? It would have to be true that
Hmm.
you're in God and God is in you. And if you can just hold that idea, you're most of the way there. You know, you don't have to go,
Well,
you don't have to have out of body experiences if God's inside you to begin with.
there's a wonderful song by an English musician named Sidney Carter, and it's sung in the voice of Mary. And the chorus line is, I carry the maker of the world in me.
Yeah,
But as you know, our friend Meister Eckhart and Carol Houselander and so many others of the great mystics have said, we are all called to be Mary. We are all called to give birth to
yeah,
Christ, to give birth to God.
yes.
We all carry the maker of the world in us.
Do you remember the
And
scene where she's pregnant and she goes to visit cousin Elizabeth?
mhm,
She's one of the patrons of the order
okay,
of
okay,
preachers.
uh-huh.
And all she does is walk into the room. She doesn't even have a speaking part in the scene. She just walks into the room, and this whole thing happens, like happened to you and I when we were
Hmm.
our
Hmm.
teens.
Hmm.
Uh, Elizabeth goes, "Whoa!" She doesn't say, "Oh, it's only my cousin." It's just plain old Mary. Mary walks into the room, and suddenly the Holy Spirit takes over the whole thing. And wow, who am I that the mother of my Lord should come to me? And the baby inside is kicking, and
And you mentioned the CAC. Richard Rohr. I heard him give a talk one time where he talked about falling in love with a box of cereal. And Barbara Brown Taylor, since I'm name dropping, let me keep going. I heard a sermon that she preached back before she was famous, because she's from this part of the country. And she talked about having a mystical experience while cleaning out her cat's litter box.
Okay.
And and I think this is something that we don't talk enough about, is that literally anything, any moment in any life can be the doorway to eternity. Was it Thomas Merton said the gate of heaven is everywhere?
Yes. I remember a
And
friend of mine, you mentioned the charismatic renewal earlier. Um, a friend of mine was trying to be charismatic and it wasn't working. But she had a bunch of kids and she was at the sink doing dishes singing. And
mhm,
before she realized that she was singing in tongues, there wasn't anybody standing over her trying to make her have the gift of tongues. She just
just
was
given.
busy doing the dishes and it happened.
It's almost like, yeah, she had to get out of her own way. That's what it sounds like.
Well, or out of other people's way. Sometimes people will have an idea that it must function this way. You must sit
Yep.
still and do that. We must hover over
Yeah.
you and pray over you, and then you'll, whatever. People have ideas about how the spirit will work and so on. Um,
It's true of all of us.
I want to I want to have you on again if you would submit to it. But we're near the end of an
Mhm.
hour anyway.
Okay.
And I wanted to at least say to this audience that people sometimes use the word accessible to describe the work of a writer.
Oh.
And uh, think of access. It's like having a step stool to reach the top shelf, or something functional, something that it enables you to get to something else. And you don't dumb down the topic, um, but you use plain spoken language and you make accessible something. And this topic seems so esoteric and difficult to understand even before you begin to speak of it. But your writing is very colloquial, uh, simple to understand, and for people that might not have time to sit and read, do what I'm doing. I'm listening to his work on Audible. You can do that in the car or while you're walking the dog or whatever, and have this new friend talking in your ear.
Well, thank you. That's a lovely response. I think it was our dear friend Richard Rohr who said about my book, he said, Carl demystifies mysticism. And I thought, I can't think of a better endorsement
Uh,
for the
well,
book.
Rory's a
That's,
great writer too, and he has
yeah,
a gift for being able to say a lot in a few words.
yeah,
Such a
absolutely,
sweet man.
absolutely. So,
Well, the
well,
next time
thank you
you come
so
on, if you
much.
will, I want with a lot of my audience pays attention to out of body
Hmm.
experience, consciousness,
Hmm.
afterlife, post death communication. A lot of people that listen to my show are interested in hospice work or
Hmm.
end of life consciousness and all that. And you've been through the death of your daughter.
Yeah.
Um, it might be interesting to have you on a show to
Well,
talk more in that direction.
let me, if you would be open to it, let me see if Fran would want to come on with me.
That'd be
I,
great.
I can't promise because she again she's
You're not the boss of her, is that what you're saying?
yeah, well, there's that, and and like all truly great spiritual people, she's got nothing to prove,
Yeah.
But if I can let her know that this would be fun, because she has some amazing stories to tell as well, and yes, we would there that would be a delight, because I think we're both very much interested in this question of how yeah how do I put this, that death is a line, and it's a porous line, and that the relationship of who we are as embodied creatures and the relationship of who we are in God's eternity is much more intimate than most of us realize. And of course, the kind of work you're doing, and I think I mentioned to you, I haven't had a near-death experience, but I have people I love who have, and they're quite moving stories. And just recognizing that they are, they're signposts from God. They're signposts that this world is a wondrous world that we often don't recognize. And isn't that what mysticism is learning to recognize the wonder? And
Well,
so I think
and death is very ecumenical. There's not just one kind of person who dies. It
every one of us gets one, you know?
yeah, and so
And so,
there's all kind of ways that, and in the work that I do, I deal with all these different people that weren't religious, and here they are, coming to my door in the middle of the night,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's great fun.
So
Anyway,
we're wonderful.
do you have any sign off you want to do? Any way to reach you or website?
Well, yeah, if you want to connect with me online, the easiest thing to do is visit my kind of like my main website, which is it's a Gaelic word. It's Anamcara. It's ANAMCHARA.com. And there on that website you'll find links to my newsletters and to how to buy my books and upcoming events and so forth and so on. So that's
All right.
that's the best way to do it.
All right. Well, we'll make sure that the show notes and any way that this goes out anywhere has all that information on there. And so if people would like to know more about you and your work, that's the way to do it.
Super. Thank you.
All right. Well, I feel like I met a new friend today.
Yeah, likewise.
Thanks for being with us. So this has been this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. Thanks for being with us. Remember that I pray for you all the time. And when I do, I'm most interested in the healing inside you of the origin of whatever steals your joy. Any place there's only so much of you. Anything that saddens you is in there somewhere, and the Holy Spirit can find that spot and bring some light to it, and maybe help you move in a. If you can't be joyful today, can you at least live in joyful hope? And can there be some incoming of the light or something that helps you to have a happier day than you would have otherwise? That's what I try to do. So again, thanks for being with us, and join us next time for the next episode of The Joyful Friar. God bless you. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless. Have you ever had to do something so difficult that you had to deal with it in stages? Imagine dying suddenly with no forewarning, being in a car crash, a shooting, a drowning. You leave your body, but then what? How do you transition into the afterlife? For some, it flows all at once, but not for everybody. For some, the process of transitioning into the afterlife is interrupted. Maybe there's a need for rest or for learning, or maybe just the chance to adjust to such an abrupt experience. I'm Father Nathan Castle. I'm a Catholic priest. About 23 years ago, the Holy Spirit began to send me people who had died traumatically. They entered my dreams during sleep, showing me what had happened to them and asking for help. They had died and moved on, sort of, but they'd come to a moment where it was time to complete the crossing. With the help of the angels and saints and earthly prayer partners, we've assisted more than 300 souls as they complete their crossing. You can read about it in my book series. Afterlife Interrupted books are available on Amazon. You can also learn more by visiting my website, nathan-castle.com. God bless you.